Hello and welcome to Danielle's Astrology. Today I'm going to be taking you through the ancient origins of astrology. We're going to go back 4,000 years to ancient Mesopotamia, which is modern day Iraq. We're going to go back to ancient Egypt, and we're going to look at where astrology has come. Okay, where it's come through, what types of cultures it's passed through, its high points and its low points. We're going to discuss modern astrology as it is found today, how it has changed from the ancient tradition, as well as the revival of traditional astrology. So let's start with our journey back, back to ancient Mesopotamia. Now, if we go back, we notice that the type of astrology that's practiced is called mundane astrology, the astrology that is connected to observing the celestial realm. So we're looking at the stars, and then we're looking at the earth and drawing correlations. We're saying when we see these planets, or we see this say it's a solar eclipse, we notice the king will die, or we notice that the populace goes into a state of excitement. So it's through observation that these particular omens were created. So this is our first type of astrology. Now, as we go forward in time a bit, we get to the 5th century BC, we start to see the arrival of natal astrology. Now, natal astrology is the astrology that, if you've had your birth chart read, you will understand. It is a snapshot of the cosmos at the exact date, time, place you're born. Now, this type of astrology came into being after the Persians invaded Mesopotamia, and there was a little bit of a decentralization of astrology. Now, that seems to be a good thing. So natal astrology happened, and at the same time, we noticed that the 12 signs were, they were isolated. We ended up having the signs broken into even 30-degree segments, and there being 12. Okay, so the signs kind of came later in the development of astrology, actually. So we carry on through, and we go to ancient Alexandria. So from the period of the 2nd century BCE through to about the 7th century AD, we have the Hellenistic period of astrology. Now, this is a very interesting period, especially from the 2nd century through to the 2nd century AD. So that's like, a 400-year period. This is a high point of astrology. We have got the city of Alexandria, which is a hub of learning. We've got scholars, we've got libraries, we've got astrology galore. So it'll be a place I'd love to go back to if I could do some time travel. So that was a really interesting time. But then what we had was we had the fall of the Roman Empire. So as we get toward the end, we get the fall of the Roman Empire, which marks the end of the Hellenistic period and the transition into the Islamic period. So a lot of astrology a lot of books are destroyed, but also we do see quite a few transmitted to the Islamic period, to the Islamic scholars, and then we see them developing the tradition, and they contribute a lot. That we're starting to see that now through some of the more recent translations. And so we go through the Islamic period, and then we notice in the 12th century that astrology seems to have a high point where it gets translated into Latin and it's disseminated through Europe. So it's a pretty exciting time. We see astrology gets connected through, it's connected with medicine, it's connected with like temperament theory, and it is at a very high point in our society. So that kind of carries on through, and then we get to the period which is the period of William Lilly, and he was a horary astrologer. So that's the kind of astrology that answers questions, and from the 17th century. So he writes one of the first books that is written in English on horary astrology called Christian Astrology. And then following Lilly, we have what is kind of like a bit of a downfall, or, we find the descent of astrology somewhat when we see the new Enlightenment period. So we've got increased reason, increased science, and the culture is changing. So astrology is starting to become, out of favor. And so it's not for a couple of 100 years until it starts to return. But when it returns differently. There's a number of reasons for this, but what happens is we see some of the more contemporary astrologers, like there's a guy called Alan Leo, Now, Alan Leo was a theosophist. Now, this is a great word. Okay, so he was like interested in esoteric studies. He was interested in New Age concepts. So things like past lives and karma and these kind of concepts that he started to introduce into astrology. Now, this is where things started to change, because up to this point we had a relatively preserved culture. Yes, we've lost a lot of text. We had lost a lot of text from, the Greek texts, and a lot of ancient, Persian texts have been lost. But we still had a relatively smooth transition of the tradition. Okay, but when we get to Alan Leo, he wants to simplify things. He wants to make astrology digestible for all, and so he focuses on the sun. Now, he starts these sun sign columns like in the 1930s. Okay, he starts them in the 1930s, and we've also got Dane Rudhyar who comes in around that time, and we start to see astrology become intermeshed with psychology, with some of these more New Age concepts, and it's no longer the same type of astrology practiced in the past. The ancient astrology is given kind of a little bit of like, I don't know, it's not so cool because it's kind of more predictive. We need to look within and discover our soul. Okay, and I guess astrology really follows the cultural vibe at the time. And so that's what happens. We see astrology taking on a more personal tone, going from, so in traditional astrology, we look at the chart as, a symbol, or it's an overall picture of the life, including the events, people, places, situations, as well as the individual. Okay, so it's the whole life. But in modern astrology, a lot of the time, the chart is seen as a map of the psyche. And this somewhat comes from Alan Leo and some of his contemporaries. So it's just interesting to note that that is relatively modern. Same is the concept of the sun representing you as a person, because that was not a traditional concept. If we were going to look at your personality factors or your mannerisms or your character, we would look at your ascendant, because that's a very rapidly changing point in the chart. So yeah, I hope you found this an interesting video about the way that astrology's changed. We have had what we would call a revival of traditional astrology in the last 20 to 30 years, which is really exciting, because a lot of texts that were previously unavailable because they might not have been translated, or they might have been sort of lost, or no one may have had interest in translating them. We've had scholars just revive them, and we've got so much new knowledge. We've got exciting new techniques that have been preserved from over 2,000 years ago, which I'm really excited about. So if you want to know anything more, please comment below, and I will speak with you again soon. Thanks for watching.